Oh, my God.
Oh, my baby. Continuing to read from A Mountain in Tibet. From page 196. In September 1992, 6 months before the second retreat finished, I left Pure Lands to attend an occasion that was absolutely momentous for me on every level. I was going back to Tibet for the first time since I had escaped 33 years before. I would be traveling with Akon to Surfu Monastery near Lhasa for the enthronement of His Holiness, the 17th Karmapa. The 17th Karmapa was then a 7-year-old boy who had been officially recognized as the reincarnation of the 16th Karmapa by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the Kagyu lineage regents, and the Chinese communist authorities earlier in the year. This was highly significant, as it was the first time that a reincarnate High Lama had been recognized by the communists. The practice of Buddhism in Tibet had been virtually outlawed since the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 76. But politics had shifted since then, and the leadership in Beijing was now keen to be seen to allow freedom of worship in Tibet. On the day that I received the news that the 17th Karmapa had been found, I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to meet my old master in his new body and continue our relationship. So it was with a mixture of excitement and bubbling joy that I set off to travel to Tibet for his enthronement some months later. The prospect of going back to my homeland could not have been any happier now that I was going to see Karmapa and to witness the most spiritually significant moment for our Kagyu lineage. There was an additional excitement and sense of pride for me, because it had fallen to my brother to be asked to join one of the 2 search parties who were charged with finding the young boy. I couldn't wait to talk to Akon and to hear his story of finding His Holiness. Chapter 12. Mystic. On the day of the enthronement, I felt I was participating in an outpouring of spiritual energy. The atmosphere was electric. Akon and I were privileged to have a place in the front row of the shrine room of Surfu Monastery, the principal seat of the Karmapas, which was packed to bursting. Outside the doors of the temple, there were thousands of people pushing to get in. Even some very high lamas were unable to gain entry. The mood was ecstatic, but undercut with desperation. The Tibetan people had finally been allowed to practice their faith after decades of repression, and now their devotion was overflowing. As I stood in the throng of people within the shrine room, I realized that it was becoming dangerous. If the crowd did not fall back, there was going to be a surge, a crush, and people might be hurt or even killed. Tens of thousands of Tibetans had traveled from far and wide to witness this most significant event for our Kagyu lineage. The Chinese authorities were unprepared. They had closed roads leading to Surfu, but that hadn't deterred people. And now the soldiers stationed at the doors of the temple had lost control of the situation. Then I saw Akong striding through the crowd, which fell aside for him. I couldn't see what happened outside, but I heard later that he stood on a platform at the temple gates, spoke to the people, and beat some of them back with a bullwhip, preventing them from surging into the hall. To my mind, he was manifesting as Mahakala, the protector deity of the Kagyu lineage. However he managed it, it worked. The crowd became quiet. The danger passed, and the ceremony began. His Holiness the 17th Karmapa was still a little boy, but the grace and patience he exhibited astounded everyone who saw him. The ritual took several hours. Once it had finished, he sat for many more hours as tens of thousands of devotees filed past him seeking his blessing. He was undaunted and calm as he blessed each one. When it was my turn to speak to him, I asked him if I might be permitted to return to retreat now. This was a significant question for me, as his predecessor had told me that if I spent 20 years in retreat and practiced well, I would attain a high level of realization. He smiled, gave me a swift kick to the head, and in the same old tones that he had always used with me, said, "Go back and help your brother." It was just like being with His Holiness the 16th Karmapa again. From that day forward, I accepted unquestioningly that I should serve Akong in whatever capacity he decided. Akon had given me his account of finding His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, who up until his enthronement was known as Apo Gaga, or the one who makes us very happy. The boy was a child of nomads from Bagor in Kham. His birthplace and names of his parents had been predicted by His Holiness the 16th Karmapa in a letter he concealed in a protective amulet that he gave to Tai Situpa Rinpoche, one of his 4 heart sons, shortly before he died. It is customary among the Karmapas to write and conceal a prediction letter with details of where the next incarnation will be found. But a number of years passed and nothing was discovered. It then occurred to Tai Situpa to check the amulet His Holiness had given him more closely, and he was delighted to find the letter hidden inside. Once the letter had been authenticated, a search party of 3 monks was set out from Surfu Monastery to look for the child. On 21st May 1992, they found him. Having been directed by the steward at the local monastery, they arrived at Apo Gaga's family tent. The family already knew they were coming. Their eldest son, Yeshe Rabsel, had been staying at the local monastery when the search party arrived. The monks were careful not to divulge the real reason for their presence. The word Karmapa was not mentioned. They announced that they were looking for a local woman called Loga, for whom they had a letter from India. The steward correctly deduced that this Loga was the mother of Yeshe Rabsel, and called him in to talk to the visitors. When they discovered that Yeshe Rabsel did indeed have a 7-year-old brother, and that his father was named Karma Dondrup, they could not contain their excitement. The children's parents' names tallied with those in His Holiness the Karmapa's prediction letter, as did the location of his birth. The monks told Yeshe Rabsel that they were looking for the reincarnation of a tulku from their monastery, and arrangements were made to visit the family 2 days later. When Yeshe Rabsel arrived home that evening to inform his parents of the exciting news, his little brother began to dance for joy.
Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, om.
That morning, Apogaga had packed his things into a bundle, ready to take with him. And told his mother that it was time for him to go to his monastery. Once the distinguished guests were settled on the sheepskins that had been placed on the floor of the family's tent, the food had been served, they began to question Loga and Karma Dondrup. Apogaga hung back, looking serious, as his parents recounted his life story with all its omens and auspicious events. 3 days after the birth, the 70 or so families in their community had heard the sound of conch shells, which are associated with the Buddha, but could find no source for the music. Then the air was also full of cymbals and reed horns. Loga's other children searched all round the tent, but nobody could identify where the music was coming from. And then the baby boy, just 3 days old, stopped feeding, looked up at her, and addressed her as Amma, the Tibetan word for mother. He quickly confirmed himself to be a highly unusual infant. From the time he was 3 months old, the baby emanated light. After nightfall, his older sisters would sit close to their sleeping brother and use the glow from his face to finish their domestic tasks. There were many, many such stories. The group from Serfu were in no doubt. Apo Gaga was pronounced the genuine reincarnation. Things moved very quickly from there. It had been intended that Jamjong Kongtrul would head a second search party, representing the 4 Heart Sons. But tragically he had been killed in a car accident in April, a month earlier. So the surviving regents then asked Akong and another Lama to take on the task of going to the child and conducting further tests on their behalf.
Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, om.
Akon had a very personal test to carry out concerning an event that only he knew about. When His Holiness the 16th Karmapa was dying, Akon had visited him in hospital in Chicago. This was not long after my ordination, when I had just entered retreat. His Holiness knew he would die soon, and asked to see his closest disciples in order to make arrangements. He sent Akon off on a mission. As my brother left, Akon made a request. Could he have one of His Holiness's teeth after his body had been cremated as a personal relic? His Holiness the Karmapa immediately agreed. But since Akon was away when the cremation took place, he was not present to collect the tooth. 11 years later, Akon arrived at the tent of Apogaga's family. Having greeted everybody, he turned to the rosy-cheeked little boy and asked if he had anything to give him. The child immediately reached under the rug he was sitting on and pulled something out. When he opened his fist, he revealed one of his milk teeth. Akon was overjoyed and gathered His Holiness the 17th Karmapa in his arms for a hug. The Karmapa grinned at my brother and ruffled his hair, as if they'd known each other forever. You can imagine how my heart thrilled to this story when I heard it. Akon also told me of the extraordinary experience of traveling with Apogaga and his family to Serfu Monastery, along roads lined by thousands of joyful people who had come out to greet the new Karmapa. Once they arrived, the child began a series of preparations for his enthronement. Many of these were highly elaborate and had been performed for hundreds of years, but some were the stuff of everyday family life. It fell to Akon to give Apogaga his first ever bath, for example. The little boy was not at all keen on the idea and protested, just like any other 7-year-old. Akon was, of course, a father, and had seen all this before with his own children. My return to Tibet was quite brief, and was focused on meeting His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, which for me was an experience of a lifetime. The day of his ordination was one I had never expected to see. Officials from the People's Republic of China sat on one side of the shrine room, across from the lamas and tulkus, as the clamor of thousands of Tibetans trying to get into the room filled the air. At the center of all this was His Holiness the 17th Karmapa, the living embodiment of the continuity of our Kagyu lineage. The wave of destruction that I had believed had swept away my world more than 30 years before had not in fact erased it completely. Serfu Monastery was still here. The 12th century building may have been torn down during the Cultural Revolution, but the shrine room had been rebuilt and was being used to celebrate the happiest occasion. The valley was still beautiful. This place was still sacred.
Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, omane bime, omane bime, omane bime. Omane bime, om.
Omani peme hum, om takiso, omahom bele guru peme siri hum.
Omani peme hum, takiso, omahom bele guru peme siri hum. Continuing from page 196 from a mountain in Tibet.
It's nice when you was in the retreat and he got news from Akong that he was going to Tibet.
Yeah.
And to see the 17 come up, I'm sure he was very excited. I bet he couldn't wait to get there quick enough.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Yes.
We're picking up on it, aren't we, as we're reading it? It's very exciting.
So the excitement was building up until the time we had to go there, you know. We have a couple of months before we had to travel there, you know.
Yes.
And the excitement probably was building up. Yeah. Yes. Yes, and it's good how all these people from all over were trying to get to see him. And Rinpoche had to eventually go and keep him under control.
Yes.
And of course, Lama Yeshe had to, when I got a chance, had to ask him a question if she should stay in retreat. And they kicked him in the head, you help your brother. So that knocked that in the head. I remember that time, you know, I was down in the south end of Holy Island, and I had a dream that night at the enthronement. And on the table was bread. We made the homemade bread, and there was a star marked on it, and a piece of paper at the other end, and on the piece of paper it said Jawa Kamapa. So I was puzzled what that star meant, you know. And three months later, a magazine came out and said, a star was born who descended to the throne to become Jawa Kamapa.
Wow.
And I remember at that time going out and collecting some wild flowers and throwing them into the air as an offering.
Isn't that beautiful?
So after that, I ended up at Samueling working alongside Akong Rinpoche, and I told him about it, and he listened, and I asked him, I said to him, what does bread mean? He said, sustenance of life.
Karmapa, the sustenance of life. Yes, it's true.
Yeah. So the star explained the story, so it was very interesting. And the story Lama Yeshe was talking about meeting Kamapa and other people was very exciting. It's very exciting.
Definitely.
I'd like to know all the rest of the things that happened, good omens, what happened around that time.
Yes, well, certainly it was being picked up all around the world with your dream, and I'm sure that there were people in other places that had the same sense of very special time and signs that were coming and manifesting. It's quite miraculous. It's like the veil or the edge between the materialistic world and the spiritual world was very thin, and the spiritual world was just permeating everything.
Yes.
Very, very beautiful. It would have really touched people and opened their hearts. And shown it was a significant event for across the world, including everybody who was aware and open to it.
I think so people like Lama Yeshe, the spiritual dream is there all the time.
Yes.
It's there all the time.
That's right. That's what practice makes accessible, doesn't it?
Yes. So that was brilliant. And the cuckoo landing on the tent, and unusual flowers appearing, you know.
Yes, there were all sorts of signs.
Yeah. Yes. It was brilliant. It was great. And the story about Kamapa kicking Kamapa on the head, I heard that story before.
You heard that story?
I heard that story before.
About Lama Yeshe getting a kick in the head?
Yes. I heard it different, slightly different. story. I heard somebody say, he says, who's your teacher? He said, Temple Kappa. He says, 16. They kicked me heads like 16 Kamappa's your teacher. That's the story. That's what the story I was told, but I might not be right. But,
Well, there could be more than one thing that happened.
Yeah, yes.
It could have been a longer version than what came into the book.
Yes.
So we can ask Lama Yeshe Rinpoche about that, huh?
Yeah, he can answer these questions.
He can answer these questions.
And he can answer all the other good omens that happened around that time.
That's right. All the special things that were showing the people that were there and showing the world that this was an amazing time and a very important event.
It's good. It's good to share the excitement to all those people.
Yes.
Yes. You know, it was really, really exciting.
And all those Tibetans finally being able to come together publicly for something that was touching their heart and so important in their lives.
That's right. They waited so long for that moment, you know.
Yes.
And it came, so it was just an explosion of joy.
Yes.
An explosion of joy.
That's right. It's nice to share in it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
No, it's available for everyone who has the capacity to make a connection.
Yeah.
And Lama Yeshe Rinpoche was there, right in the front row.
Yeah.
For all that happened.
That was brilliant, yes. That was good. It was a good thing to happen, you know.
Yes. The story of Karmapa when he was with his family and the miraculous things that were occurring in the tent and the very basic nomadic lifestyle that was transformed by having such a special child in the family. So even everyday activities were becoming very magical and amazing because of his presence. And the sisters and the others knew immediately that they had a very, very special brother. It was very wonderful, wasn't it, that Akam Rinpoche was able to travel with that family all the way to Surfu.
Yeah.
And witness all the people along the road who were just so amazed and happy about having the Karmapa going by them.
Yes, and it was good. And he had something to do with identifying the Karmapa.
That's right.
And it's good. I remember the story about the tea. You know?
Do you?
Yes. So
it's very memorable.
Yes, I remember that story. So that was quite good.
Hear it told by Lama Yeshe Rinpoche.
Yeah. So we got the Karmapa by surprise, maybe not, but he said, you got something, and they knew right away what it was, you know.
Yes.
How could everybody at that age know that unless they had special powers, yeah?
We feel the excitement. It's very beautiful. Even years later, it has a quality to it that is very strong.
Karmapa channel.
Karmapa channel.